This is Elias. Before an entire courtroom, he watched an officer of the law, a man sworn to protect the truth, deconstruct his life with a cold, calculated lie. Every word that came out of Officer Miller's mouth was another brick in the wall separating him from his freedom, from his honor, from everything he had built in 52 years of an upright life. It was the assassination of his reputation, broadcast live under the merciless lights of that room. A good man was being painted as a monster. Has your faith ever been tested in this way, to the point where God's silence felt like abandonment? Before I tell you how God acted in his life at the moment when that officer's lie seemed to have sealed his fate, comment here where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel now. Believe me, you won't want to miss what happens when we place things in his hands, even when the whole world seems to be against us. The air in the courtroom was cold, a chill that came not from the air conditioning, but from the indifference in the prosecutor's eyes and the presumption of guilt that hung over him. Elias felt it weighing on his shoulders like a lead mantle. He wasn't a defendant. He was a target, an easy target. A black man, soft-spoken with a carpenter's calloused hands, sitting on a polished wooden bench that felt more like an executioner's block than a place of defense. He looked at his hands, the same ones that had built furniture that brought comfort to homes, the same. Ones that held his wife until her last breath, and were now being described as the hands of an aggressor. The prosecutor paced back and forth, her heels echoing like hammer blows in the tense silence. She addressed the jury, but her eyes, sharp as razors, shot at Elias with every sentence. She used Officer Miller's words as a weapon, repeating the lie that Elias had threatened him, that a simple tape measure in his car was a potential weapon. She spoke of contempt and aggressive behavior, and with each repetition the lie gained strength, solidifying in the air, becoming a truth to those who did not know him. Elias felt each word like a physical blow, a public humiliation that stripped him of his dignity. In the gallery, his daughter Sarah wept in silence, her face buried in her hands. To her, this was an incomprehensible nightmare. She saw her father, the kindest and most serene man she knew, being turned into a caricature of violence and anger. Her heart screamed for justice, for a reaction, for anything that would break this farce. She wanted him to stand up, to shout his innocence, to fight in the way the world understands fighting, with noise, with fury. But Elias remained quiet, and his quietness was, for Sarah, a mixture of agony and misunderstanding. She did not understand the strength that lay in that silence. Beside her, Pastor Davy and a few other members from Elias's small church formed an invisible circle of prayer. Their heads were slightly bowed, their lips moving without a sound. They were not there as spectators of a judicial drama. They were in a spiritual battle. They understood that the true court was not this one, and that Elias's fight was not against the prosecutor or the police officer, but against the forces that use lies to destroy faith. Their presence was a silent reminder to Elias that he was not alone, even if he felt like the loneliest person in the world at that moment. The public defender, an overworked young man with deep, dark circles under his eyes, seemed to have already given up. He flipped through his papers without conviction, as if searching for a magic escape he knew didn't exist. Before the trial, he had advised Elias to take a plea deal. "It's an officer's word against yours, Elias. You know how this ends," he had said with a tone of pity and pragmatism. For the lawyer, this was just another lost case in his endless pile. He didn't see a man of faith being tested. He saw a set of unfavorable facts and a system that rarely fails to protect its own. Elias felt his own lawyer's discouragement. It was like drowning and seeing the lifeguard on the beach, just shaking his head in resignation. The loneliness deepened. In that room, the truth seemed irrelevant. What mattered was the narrative, and the narrative was being controlled by a man who lied with frightening calm. Elias closed his eyes for a moment and remembered the night of the stop. The flashing blue and red lights, Officer Miller's harsh voice, the contempt in his eyes before a single word had been exchanged. He hadn't felt fear that night, just a deep sadness for that man's anger. He remembered answering, "Yes, sir," and "No, sir," maintaining the calm that his late wife, Helena, always said was his greatest strength. "Your peace disconcerts the devil, my love," she used to say with a smile. But here, in this courtroom, his peace was being interpreted as guilt, his serenity as the silent admission of a crime he did not commit. The secular world had no vocabulary for the strength that comes from a spirit that trusts in God. For them, the absence of anger was weakness. The absence of panic was proof of the lie. As Officer Miller continued his testimony, Elias fought his own internal battle. A voice inside him, the voice of wounded pride, of indignation, whispered for him to react. It wanted him to stand up and shout the truth, to expose that man's perjury. But another voice, older and deeper, the voice of his faith, asked for calm. It asked for trust. Be still and know that I am God. The passage echoed in his mind, not as a cliché, but as a direct instruction, a command to his agitated soul. He clung to this phrase like a castaway clings to a piece of wood in the middle of a storm. Officer Miller was a talented actor. He narrated the lie with such vivid detail that it seemed he himself believed it. He described how Elias, according to him, had advanced toward him, how his tone of voice was threatening. He took the carpentry tool, a simple wooden spatula Elias used to apply glue, and presented it to the jury as if it were a dagger. He was holding it like this, Your Honor, with his knuckles white. I feared for my safety, Miller said, his face a mask of false seriousness. Elias looked at the spatula, an object of creation, being turned into a weapon of destruction by a liar's mouth, and felt a lump in his throat. With every lie told, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier, more suffocating. Elias could feel the jury's gazes shifting. Initial doubt gave way to conviction. They saw a decorated officer on one side and an unknown black man on the other. The math of prejudice is simple and brutal. The weight of the uniform, of authority, crushed the truth. The story Miller told was easier to believe, more aligned with the stereotypes they carried, even if unconsciously. Elias was no longer a carpenter. He was a defendant, guilty until proven innocent, and proof seemed impossible. He remembered a conversation with his daughter Sarah weeks earlier. She, with all her youthful energy and sense of justice, wanted him to fight. Dad, we have to sue him. We have to go to the press, expose this man. Elias just hugged her and said, My daughter, our fight is not in the same arena as theirs. Our justice comes from a higher place. At the time, Sarah didn't understand. Now, seeing her father cornered, she thought his approach had been a mistake. His faith seemed like passivity in the face of such a flagrant injustice, and it broke her heart. Inside, Elias felt a pang of doubt. Lord, where are you? He cried out in silence, his heart tight. Do you see this? Do you see the lie prevailing? For a moment, the unshakable faith that had sustained him his whole life seemed to waver. The image of his wife, Helena, came to his mind. She, even on her deathbed, in terrible pain, never doubted. God is in control, Elias. Always, she would whisper. He felt small, weak, unworthy of the faith she had. The spiritual desert of that courtroom seemed vast and infinite, and he felt completely alone. It was then, at the bottom of his anguish, that a memory rescued him. It was a Sunday, many years ago. His young son, whom he had lost to illness at a young age, was learning to ride a bicycle. He fell, scraped his knee, and started to cry. Elias ran to help him, but the boy, between sobs, looked up at him and said, I know it hurts, Dad, but I'm going to try. Again, that childish courage, that pure resilience, echoed in his heart now. He wasn't a child falling off a bicycle, but the principle was the same. The pain was real, the injustice was real, but the decision to trust and to continue was his. A subtle warmth began to spread through his chest, calming the storm. It was the peace that surpasses all understanding, the same he felt after a long prayer. He received no audible answer, no miraculous sign, just an inner certainty, a firmness that re-established itself in his soul. The prosecutor could shout, the officer could lie, the jury could judge, but his spirit was anchored to a rock they could neither see nor touch. The fight was not lost. It just wasn't being fought with the weapons they expected. Officer Miller, feeling confident, began to add flourishes to his story. He spoke of Elias's neighborhood as a problem area, insinuating that violence was to be expected from someone like him. It was a low blow, an attempt to use social prejudice to seal his conviction. Elias, who had helped build the playground in that very neighborhood and organized the community's Christmas party, heard this not with anger, but with a deep sadness. That man was not just lying about him. He was poisoning the image of an entire community to save himself. The defense attorney conducted his cross-examination, but his questions were weak, predictable. He questioned the procedure, the times, technical details that didn't shake the emotional narrative Miller had built. The officer dodged every question with the skill of an experienced politician. "My memory of the events is clear, counsel. It was a high-stress situation," he repeated, using jargon to protect himself. The public defender sighed, defeated, and sat down. The silence that followed felt like the final nail in the coffin of Elias's defense. Sarah, in the gallery, squeezed her eyes shut, as if she could no longer bear the scene. Tears now ran freely down her face. The hope she still held, however small, disintegrated in that moment. She saw her father being swallowed by an indifferent and cruel system, and the faith he so often preached seemed like a lullaby in the middle of a battlefield. To her, the war was lost, and her father's silence was the white flag of surrender. But Elias did not feel surrendered. On the contrary, the certainty that had filled him moments before was now an armor. He looked at Officer Miller, not with hatred, but with a kind of sad compassion. He saw a man so lost, so cornered by his own choices, that he needed to destroy another to feel safe. Elias understood that the real prison was not the one that awaited him, but the one Miller already inhabited, a prison of fear, of lies, and of spiritual darkness. Elias's calm was not passivity, it was the serenity of one who knows that the final judge had not yet given his verdict. The prosecutor rose for her closing arguments. She walked slowly before the jury, her face serious, her voice filled with a theatrical gravity. She recapped Officer Miller's story, painting Elias as a danger to society, a man whose calm was just the facade for a contained rage. "Don't be fooled by this appearance of meekness," she said, pointing at Elias. "He is a wolf in sheep's clothing, a man who did not hesitate to threaten an officer of the law who was just doing his job." Every word was a nail being hammered, fixing the false image in the minds of the jurors. Elias listened to it all, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. It was so surreal, so far from the truth, that for a moment he felt detached from reality. He looked at the faces of the jurors. Some stared at him harshly, others averted their eyes, uncomfortable. He saw no malice in them, just confusion and the human willingness to believe the simplest version, the most visible authority. They didn't know him. They only knew the story they had been told. And the story was a well-told lie. When the prosecutor finished and returned to her seat, a heavy silence fell upon the courtroom. It was a silence of expectation, the moment before the final blow. The judge, a man with graying hair and a stern expression, cleared his throat and turned to Elias. His eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses were indecipherable. He first looked at the defense attorney, who gave a slight shrug, a gesture of helplessness. Then he fixed his gaze on Elias, sitting in the defendant's chair, the center of this entire storm. "Mr. Elias," the judge said, his voice resonating in the silent room, "do you have anything to say in your defense? Do you deny threatening an officer of the law?" The question hung in the air, charged with the weight of the entire trial. It was his chance, the last one. Sarah in the gallery held her breath. Pastor Davi bowed his head a little lower. The defense attorney looked at him with a silent plea to say something, anything, that could save them. Everyone expected a vehement denial, an emotional appeal, perhaps even an explosion of justified anger. Elias did not move immediately. He closed his eyes for a long second, and in that second, the noise of the courtroom disappeared. He was no longer there. He was in his small workshop, the smell of wood and varnish in the air. He was in his church, the sound of hymns filling the space. He was beside Helena's bed, holding her hand. He sought strength not in the arguments of the law, but in the foundations of his life, in the pillars of his faith. He took a deep breath, a breath that seemed to carry decades of prayers and trials. Then he opened his eyes, but he did not look at the judge, nor at the prosecutor. His eyes met those of Officer Miller across the room. The officer, who until then had seemed so confident, averted his gaze for an instant, caught off guard by the intensity of that eye contact. Elias's voice, when he finally spoke, was neither loud nor aggressive. It was firm, clear, and filled with a peace that no one in the room could comprehend. A peace that disarmed, that confused, that broke the protocol of that confrontational environment. "I deny the lie," he began, each word heavy and deliberate. The silence in the room was absolute. But more than that, he continued, his voice gaining a serene strength, I pray that the truth finds its way into this man's heart. He paused, and his gaze remained fixed on Miller. Because only God knows what really happened that night, and it is in his judgment that I trust. He wasn't defending himself, he was testifying. He was changing the arena of the battle, taking it from the court of men and elevating it to a higher sphere. A shockwave went through the courtroom. It wasn't a noise, but a palpable shift in the room's energy. The prosecutor, who was ready to rebut any denial, was left speechless, her mouth slightly open. The judge furrowed his brow, not with anger, but with genuine bewilderment. The jurors looked at each other, confused. This was not the response of a cornered criminal. It was not a rhetorical trick. It was something different, something they didn't know how to process. Elias's calm, combined with those words, was a weapon no one there had expected. Officer Miller, the target of that unexpected prayer, became visibly uncomfortable. He shifted in his chair, his once confident face now displaying a mask of unease. He had expected shouting, accusations, denials, that he would know how to face. But how do you face a prayer? How do you combat a man who, instead of cursing you, asks God for you? Miller's armor of arrogance began to show its first cracks. Elias's declaration of faith had become a mirror, and the officer did not like what he saw reflected in it. Elias's defense attorney looked at his client with a mixture of astonishment and admiration. Throughout the whole process, he had seen Elias as a passive victim. Now he saw a warrior, but one who fought with weapons that he, the lawyer, did not know. For a moment, the cynical logic of the law gave way to something more. A spark of inspiration, an inexplicable feeling that something had changed, ignited within him. He didn't know what it was, but he felt that the game, which he had considered lost, was not yet over. Elias's faith, expressed so publicly and bravely, had planted a seed of possibility in the arid soil of that room. Elias's answer left a vacuum in the trial's script. No one knew how to proceed. It was his own lawyer, who, feeling that sudden, inexplicable inspiration, stood up. The hesitation had vanished from his shoulders. There was a new light in his eyes, a determination that wasn't there minutes before. He addressed the judge. Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to ask Officer Miller just one more question. The prosecutor started to object, but the judge, intrigued, nodded his head, allowing it. The silence returned, thick with expectation. The lawyer walked to the podium, no longer as a defeated man, but as someone who had just found a key. He did not look at his notes, he looked directly at Miller. Officer Miller, he began, his voice calm but incisive. You mentioned your concern for safety several times. I'd like to clarify a technical detail. During the stop, where exactly was your partner, Officer Kent, positioned? And his body camera, was it on and recording your interaction with my client? The question was so specific, so unexpected, that it took everyone by surprise. Officer Miller blinked, caught off guard. The confidence he had displayed vanished like smoke. He hesitated. His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape route. Well, Officer Kent he was providing cover, positioned a little behind the vehicle, he stammered. And his camera. I believe by protocol it should have been on, but sometimes there are technical failures. The battery. The answer was weak, inconsistent. Arrogance had turned into pure, visible nervousness. He knew he was on dangerous ground. At that exact moment, as if timed by an unseen force, a bailiff quietly approached the judge's bench. He was carrying a tablet and whispered something in the magistrate's ear. The judge listened, his expression changing from bewilderment to a cold intensity. He took the tablet, his eyes fixed on the screen. A low murmur started in the gallery. What was happening? The atmosphere, already tense, became electric. Elias remained motionless, his heart beating fast, but a deep peace kept him anchored. He felt it, something was happening. The judge raised his head, and his gaze was like a sentence. He did not look at Elias. He looked directly at Officer Miller, a look that could freeze fire. Officer Miller, the judge said, his voice cutting, it seems your partner, Officer Kent, had no technical problems with his camera. In fact, he has just sent the complete video file of the stop to this court. A collective gasp filled the room. Miller's face turned white as wax. His partner, the rookie who had remained silent throughout the entire process, had felt the weight of Elias's prayer and had chosen truth over blind loyalty. "Let's watch, shall we?" the judge said, with icy irony. He motioned to the bailiff. "Display the video on the large screen so that everyone can see the truth with their own eyes." The prosecutor tried to object, but the judge silenced her with a single glance. The screen, which previously displayed evidence against Elias, flickered and came to life. The grainy image of a body camera appeared, the sound of a street at night, the flashing lights of the patrol car, and then the real scene began to unfold before everyone. The video was irrefutable. It showed Elias, calm and respectful, answering every one of Officer Miller's questions. It showed the officer, his voice filled with unprovoked aggression, escalating the situation on his own. It showed the moment Miller accused Elias of threatening him, a complete fabrication, disproven by the carpenter's calm on the screen. Elias's weapon, the wooden spatula, was on the passenger seat, untouched. Every word, every gesture, every second of the video was proof of Elias's innocence and the officer's blatant perjury. From the gallery where the church members were watching, an emotional whisper cut through the shocked silence of the room. "Glory to God." It was not a shout, but an outpouring of faith, a powerful confirmation. The sound seemed to echo throughout the courtroom. Sarah, who was watching the screen with wide eyes, began to cry again, but this time they were tears of relief, of redemption, of an overwhelming admiration for her father's silent strength. The truth was not found through a legal argument. It was revealed as if the very hand of God had placed it there. Officer Miller shrank in the witness chair. The color had drained from his face, replaced by a cold sweat that glistened on his forehead. He looked at no one, only at the floor, as if he wished it would open up and swallow him. The prosecutor, for her part, was red-faced with shame. She lowered her head, unable to face Elias or the jury she had tried to convince with a lie. The system, which had seemed so infallible in its power, had been broken by the simple truth captured by a small camera. When the video ended, the silence that followed was the heaviest of all. The judge turned off the monitor. He slowly removed his glasses, cleaned them, and put them back on, a deliberate gesture full of contained fury. He looked at the jury and said, "This case is dismissed. All charges against Mr. Elias are dropped." Then his steely gaze turned back to Miller. "And this court orders an immediate investigation into Officer Miller for perjury and misconduct. Bailiff, escort this man out." As he left the courtroom, Elias did not display an air of triumph. There was no "I told you so" on his face, just the same serene humility, the same peace that had sustained him throughout the ordeal. He didn't need to boast. Justice had been served in a way far more eloquent than any words he could say. He walked out of the room, a free man, not just legally, but spiritually. He had faced the giant of lies and injustice, not with a stone, but with faith, and the giant had fallen. Sarah ran to him, hugging him with a force that left him breathless. "Dad, forgive me," she sobbed on his shoulder. "I doubted. I didn't understand." Elias just hugged her back, stroking her hair. "It's okay, my daughter. Faith is like that. Sometimes we only understand its strength after the storm has passed." The church members surrounded them, not with pity, but with a deep respect. They were not hugging a victim, but a living testimony of what it means to trust in God when all seems lost. Everyone's perception of him had changed forever. His calm was no longer seen as weakness, but as a spiritual armor forged in fire. His humility was not submission, but the confidence of one who knows he serves a king whose kingdom is not of this world. His honor, which had been dragged through the mud of lies, was restored and polished by divine truth, shining brighter than ever before. That day in court, Elias did not win a case. He demonstrated the power of a faith that moves mountains and exposes darkness to the light. As he walked away from the courthouse, leaving behind the cold marble and the tension of injustice, Elias looked up at the blue sky. A deep, overwhelming feeling of gratitude filled his heart. He felt no anger toward Miller, only a compassionate sadness. He knew that the officer's true sentence would not be given by that judge, but by his own conscience. And one day, before God, with a sigh of relief and peace, a final thought formed in his mind, clear and definitive as a fulfilled promise. In the court of men, lies may shout loudly, he thought, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. But in the silence of faith, God's justice always has the final word. If you know someone who needs their faith strengthened, who is going through an injustice and feels that God is silent, please share this video. Elias's story is proof that he acts in the details, in his own time. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about how faith in God can move mountains. Thank you for listening.